I would like to thank you to come here to my little talk about how not to create textures for VFX. I'm Simon Trumpler, he, him, and up there you can see some games I had the privilege working on. And here is one of my very first effects I made for a game at some point, a long time ago. And here are some effects I did recently. And now I would like to invite you to a little vacation on an island which I designed like the VFX paradise, okay? So this is how I imagine the paradise for VFX artists. Explosions all the time, splashes all the time, that's what we like. And I created this project just for this GDC to have a base for to talk about some textures, and textures which I think are the most commonly types you will find in VFX, like some splashes, some explosions, some water, some foam, and so on and so on. But before we come to that, I would like to give some expectation management. When you search for resources how to create textures for effects, then you will find not much. But if you find something, it will be stylized. And this is why I will not focus so much on this today. Because you can see there are some names there. If you Google them, you will find amazing resources. And I will focus a little more on semi-realistic effects. And yeah, that's what I will do. And I will also not focus on version 0. Version 0 is usually a version where you maybe not even use a texture at all. You just communicate gameplay usually. And this is what I will not focus on today. I will also not focus on the final polished version where you had a lot of time to spend into your textures, right? I will focus on a version which I call GE, stands for good enough. And the idea is that you get to this version as fast as possible, but it should look nice. Not amazing, but nice. So that you, for example, also see the scale of the explosion because it has some detail or the effect in general. And it should be a base for the discussion with, for example, art direction, that you can say, hey, shall we iterate more about the style of the effect, or can we go into the polishing phase? So this is what I would like to focus on today. And as far to my knowledge, this is maybe the first or one of the first talks focusing very specific on how to create textures for VFX. Let's start at the basics, okay? So the most common texture types for VFX artists are sprites. And this is just a texture on a little particle, so nothing special here. But we have also sprite sheets, which is just a collection of sprites on one texture, and the particle system will choose one randomly just for some variation. And then we have flipbooks, which is basically just a little movie running on a particle. And then we have volumetric textures, which is basically slices of simulations or objects stored into a volumetric texture, and then you can do some magic with that. But to be honest, I never used one. So I will not focus more on this topic, but I wanted to have the list complete, okay? And the most common use cases for textures are, okay, color, surprise, we have a color texture and put it on our particle. We also have masks, and these masks come usually at least one mask as an alpha in your color texture to mask out these shapes. But a mask can also be a grayscale image just separately stored, and you can use your shader to, I don't know, mask out your other textures if you want to. And another grayscale mask we have can be used for erosion. And you can see that my little particles fade out in a bit more interesting way than just opacity low and down, right? And then we have lookup textures, which are basically just little color gradients, and they are used to colorize a grayscale map. And here you see how I colorize my little erosion map from before with different colors, and it's just a very nice way of with not many resources, colorize something very nicely. And of course, vector maps, which are usually used to distort your UVs, so you get a little bit of extra motion into your particle. So, and now let's go about how to create these textures, because this is what we are talking about today. There are 4 ways of creating textures for VFX, at least to my knowledge. The first one is handmade. You can paint it, you can use photos, you can use procedural tools like Substance or simple tools which are specifically made to create one type of texture. Or you can simulate something, like an explosion, for example, and then bake this into a texture, usually done with Houdini or Blender, and nowadays Embergen, which is a software which can almost simulate in real time. And now, on the next slide, I will have colorized these words depending on how quick it is to do. So here you see, and I also have little emojis. So as you can see, photo bashing and simple tools are the fastest way. Then we have something in the middle ground with painting and Substance Designer, depending, of course, what you want. If you just use Substance to store out some noises, that's a bit quicker than doing a realistic fire from scratch. And learning simulation takes forever. It took weeks to follow this one course for learning how to do pyro. Doing the simulation itself also takes forever because it's so complicated, and then the rendering also takes forever. So this will be not any more part of this talk because it just takes long, and we want to achieve a good enough version quick. But Embergen sneaks a little bit in between because it's real-time simulation. And I did not use Embergen before, but for this talk I did a little test. I downloaded it, and then I saw what I could get out of it as quick as possible. And here are the results. So after 50 minutes of Embergen, I rendered out these little flipbooks. And that's not because I'm a genius, it's because Embergen comes with presets. And I think it's 60 or 70 or something like that. And you can just load them in and render them out. And it's very nice. And I think when you take a day of work, you can get a very nice base for your VFX texture library out of that. But it's important to mention you are not allowed to do that when you only have the demo version. You should buy a license, then it's okay. But there's one way which is even faster than all of them. And this is, by the way, also the reason, or one of the reasons why my talk is how to not create textures. Because you use existing textures. So, of course, it's very faster if you use something existing like texture packs or brushes than when you do everything by yourself. All of these things, like these different texture types, these use cases, and also these different ways of creating things can sometimes be a bit overwhelming. And it was important for me to share that I feel and felt like that often. And in preparation of this talk, I spoke with many other professionals, and they told me all the same. Nobody was like, oh yeah, it's super easy for me. They all were like, oh yeah, sometimes I feel like, whew, especially when there is no texture at all already in the project. So I wanted to share this. If you feel sometimes like that, it's okay, and you are not alone. And I hope with this talk, maybe I can give you some inspirations to overcome this hurdle or give you some creative ways of creating textures. Again, normally we would be very happy to see them now, but unfortunately I need to be in this a little bit more melancholic mood for this slide, because I would like to speak about, and this is the second reason why this talk is called How Not to Create Textures for VFX, because there have some things in my mind blocking me from creating good textures. And maybe if you want, you can give me a quick hand sign if this happens there on the screen. There will be a quote or a little sentence. If you had this thought in your past, or maybe you even think nowadays like that. Using photos is cheating. So I raise my hand because I thought like that. And okay, nobody here. Okay, I want to. Okay, maybe 50% or maybe 40%. Okay, that's good to hear that I'm not alone. Because I don't know where this was coming from, but for some reason I had this thought in my head. And I also know that in concept art areas, you can hear that often, that people, especially, I don't know, maybe beginners or maybe people who don't do concept art so long, they are like, oh man, you don't paint every pixel by yourself. That's cheating. And here is my little journey of not using textures. This is two textures of one of my earliest textures I did for VFX for a game at some point. This is a long time ago. I didn't know what I was doing. And of course, I didn't use textures. But later for a project, I continued doing textures. And you could maybe say, okay, these are maybe nice for a stylized game. Unfortunately, this was a semi-realistic game. But I was under this impression, oh no, I can't use textures and I have to paint everything by myself. And then finally later, at some point at the project, I finally started using some photos, and I hope we can agree that these textures on the right look a little bit better, a little bit more detailed, just a little bit more realistic. And it took me a long time to overcome this hurdle. But important, do not just use any texture from the internet. Don't go to Google and take everything. You need to check out the FAQ or the license. And just as an example, textures.com, very good. Yes, you can use it for commercial projects, and most important at the bottom, you do not need to mention our website. This is important because you find many free resources in the internet, but most of them will require you to attribute to author, which is totally fine, of course, especially when you have maybe a little indie game or something, but it is unpractical if you go to your producer at the end of Call of Duty and say, hey, I have this list of 50 people, could you please add them to the credits, because I used some brushes and textures for them. This is, they will not be delighted about it. At the producer, I mean the people would. And here's an example for being careful. The ArtStation standard license allows only one commercial project and up to 2,000 sales, which is not that much if we think about the scale of a Call of Duty or something. So usually on ArtStation you have to buy the extended license, but sometimes this is not offered by the creator. So be careful about this. And there's another reason I got blocked by. I had in my mind another weird thing. Using third-party assets is cheating. Okay, what I had in my head, is that an artist, a real artist, creates everything from scratch, and using, I don't know, texture packs from someone else is cheating. And maybe this is something artists have in general. I don't know. But I think it's important to mention that we are not artists which need a kiss from the muse and then we start creating something. We are production artists. So we should use every tool we can get to make things as fast as possible. And yeah, as mentioned, sometimes I have this now, today, even, so this is not something from the past. And if you also struggle with that, if you also have this artist brain sometimes saying, no, I want to create everything from scratch, here come my top 6 solutions to calm your artist brain down. So first, it is fast. It is very fast to use textures from someone else if you are allowed to, but don't worry, there's enough work to be done. Here, for example, is a free flipbook from Unity, which you can use for your project, but we see, yeah, I mean, it looks nice, but it's a bit stuttery, and here is what I made out of it for this project I showed you before. And to improve it a little bit, I had to adjust the color curve, the size curve, enable frame blending in the particle system so that it's not as stuttery as before. And most important, I animate the frame rate of the flipbook so that it moves fast at the beginning and slow at the end. Like when the smoke calms down because of air friction, this is what I'm achieving with that. And this is just one particle. You have now to set up the whole explosion with many particles and then add other elements like sparkles and debris and stuff like that. So there's enough work for you to do. Don't worry, just using third-party assets does not make you without work. Sometimes I had this in my mind, oh yeah, I would like to use this flipbook, but there is some data missing. For example, this flipbook is just lit from one side, but I want to have a dynamic lighting. But here I need to calm myself down and say, hey, we want to have a good enough version. It must not be super polished. So it's okay to have just static lighting. Or something, maybe you have this flipbook which stutters a little bit, and you would like to have these perfect motion vectors to blend perfectly between the frames, but you don't have them and you don't know about Slate, and it can create them for you pretty easily. Then maybe it is enough to just enable frame blending in the particle system. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. And maybe some people are like, yeah, I could imagine using third-party libraries, but I'm working in stylized effects, and these are all realistic. But here's a small example of what you can do. I mean, it's not perfect, it was just quickly drawn by me, but I used a realistic or a semi-realistic reference and draw on top to make something stylized. So this is also maybe a little inspiration for you. And also important, when you go into a company, usually you have a team with other fellow artists, and they maybe created already some textures before you. And of course, you will reuse them if possible. Why should you do a 20th explosion if there are 19 perfectly usable in the project? So you will use third-party assets anyway, and nothing speaks against taking some out of the internet if you are allowed to, of course. And then it really helps to find your art direction. On the left, you see my little explosion, which I used. This is the Unity flipbook. And on the right, I just used a different flipbook from the same pack. And I like the left one more because you have a nicer silhouette, right? The right one is a bit rounder. And now that I know this, if I should go and do my own explosion now, or simulation, I know what to look for. And this is very valuable. Finding out what you want and what you like takes usually a lot of amount of time, and these assets can help you to find out what you like quicker. And I already spoiled it a little bit. This is the most important thing. If your artist brain is like, oh no, I don't want to use assets from someone else, then you can tell it, hey, we just use it now, and maybe if there's time, we can make our own simulation or effect or explosion later. And now, finally, let's talk about practical stuff, okay? All this theory. So here's this project again. You can see some effects going on there. And these are the most important textures I created for this project, and I will go with you on a little journey and explain how those are created. First, a little general guide. If you were unsure what would be a good way to create a texture, first ask yourself, do you need a texture? If no, then enjoy life. And if yes, then ask yourself, is there a third-party asset you can use? And if so, use it. In my case, the explosion. If there's no third-party asset, then you can ask yourself, hey, is there a simple tool which generates this texture for me? And if so, use it. In my case, this will be the little cloud, which were on top of my island. And if no, then ask yourself if it's tileable. Is it a tileable texture? And if so, you can use Substance Designer. Of course, you can also use Photoshop, but in Substance, it's just a little bit faster, more convenient. And if the texture is more unique, then I usually prefer Photoshop or Krita, and yeah, that's my little guide here. And now let's talk about the explosion. Spoiler, I just used the explosion from Unity flipbooks, but I want to mention that, these are CC Zero, so you can use them for whatever you want. And they offer way more than just some explosion. They also have some nice flames and some smoke. And you find, whenever I mention something here, by the way, you will find the source down there in the corner. Embergen also offers some free VDBs, and also keep in mind that Unity and Unreal offer both usually big asset packs, which you can use if you use the respective engine. And just the Paragon assets alone contain a huge load of amazing VFX assets or assets in general. Okay, that's already for the explosion. Now I would like to talk about this background thing, which is not necessarily a VFX texture, but I want to cover some basics in there, so I included it here in this talk. First, we look at a reference, of course. I noticed that these galaxies are basically very soft gradients, and then a lot of high frequency noise on top. And then, and this is important, I wish someone would have told this to me, like, I don't know, 10 years ago. Create your source files always in a big format, meaning big format. And then set it in your engine to the size you actually need. This is future-proof. If production comes and says, hey, we make a high-res version of our game, or we make a 4K version or a 4K patch, then the only thing you have to do is increase these numbers and you are done. You do not want to repaint all your textures because you created them in too small source files, like I did a while ago. And this does not mean that I ask you to paint all these little details, which at the end nobody will see, okay? But if you, oh no, what did I do? My laptop is, something happened. I'm not sure what happened. Did I press something? No, it's good? It's good, okay. So this does not mean that you paint all these details, but the workflow and the time, the time investment is the same if you use a big brush, for example, or photos on a big canvas, or if you use a smaller version of the same brush on a small canvas. So it's exactly the same work for you as an artist, but the one version on the left is future-proof and the other is not. And I have a very nice example for that. In Baldur's Gate 3, there are these ash particles flying in the air, and they can come really close to the camera, which I really like. And I tell you, if I would have painted this a while ago, because in my head, an ash particle is something very small. So I would have created a 32 by 32 texture and call it a day. But this would then be just a blurry blob in front of the camera, okay? So, yeah, this is something I learned pretty late in my career, actually. Brushes. Okay, it's no surprise to use brushes. That's, wow, Simon, that's crazy. But actually, I found it really hard to find good brushes for VFX which you are allowed to use. There are some websites out there with a lot of brush packs, but mostly they are with attribution, and as I explained before, this is a little bit of a practical issue. This is not free, but Adobe bought the brushes from Kyle T. Webster some time ago and offers them for free if you have a subscription to Photoshop. And I guess most of us have, so I wanted to include it here that I like this Better Brush pack a lot, which you also see in the background with some nice clouds and sparkle shapes. And yeah, this is what I like. And also important, I always store everything, like the photos, the brush packs, everything into my cloud VFX library. With that, I have it on access on all the PCs, and even if my PC crashes at some point, I still have it, and my workflow is not disturbed by losing these assets. So this was very important to me. Saving. We save our textures, do we? Saving is something very dear to my heart because I like to have it efficient. And this is the workflow in Photoshop, and this is not very efficient. You have to press File and Save, and then select the type every time. And if you save as TGA, there is this little dialog coming up. Oh, do you want to save in 24-bit or on 32? And this is so annoying. And it can't be annoying because we want to iterate often and fast. And this is, I'm getting angry looking at this GIF, and this is already twice the speed. So here are my suggestions for making it better. If you use Krita, there is a batch exporter coming with Krita. One click, you export your textures to a desired location. In Photoshop, there's the good old QSave, very nice script. I used it a long time, but nowadays I prefer the Espresso plugin from Francesco, which is even capable of saving some folder, layer folders into the different color channels of texture, but I use it mainly for saving, and it's so good. Okay, and the rest of this texture is actually not super exciting, but you see, I iterate quickly. I paint some soft brushes, then I use this plugin, which I just mentioned, to save it, and then switch to Unreal, look at it, and then I use this Better Brush pack to finish off the texture by just adding some nice cloud shapes and so on. And yeah, this is for this texture, but I want to mention something. Maybe you're thinking now, oh, Simon, you're saying that we all need big brush packs and big brush libraries. I mean, you can, but I don't underestimate the power of the standard brushes. And before this talk, I talked with a lot of professionals, and many of them said, oh, I just use the standard brushes most of the time. So I wanted to give out some little techniques which make you get a lot out of simple brushes. First, if you have a boring stroke, you can make it more interesting by erasing some negative shapes with the eraser or lasso tool, for example. So this is a very common technique. Also, smudge is, of course, your friend. Simple stroke, smudge it around, another simple stroke, smudge it around, and you get some nice wispy shapes out of that. And I want to mention, down there, you see tiled painting happening, which means when your brush is on the one side of your canvas, it wraps around the other side of the canvas, basically, so that you can paint perfectly tiled textures there. And maybe you will now say, well, Krita had this forever, but what you see there is Photoshop. And this was just added in 2021. And I wanted to send it out here because I didn't know that. I stumbled across it on Twitter by random, and I just want to make sure everyone knows view pattern preview. This is tiled painting in Photoshop. It's amazing. And Shannon has very nice tutorials about how to use blur, motion blur, to get a lot out of simple brushes. And she also has very nice tutorials in general about the standard brushes. So you can use these things. I will spoil it now. You don't need to take textures of these slides. There will be something later, but I will talk about this later. So, but don't worry, you will not lose these resources. And this is the most mind-blowing to me, because I didn't use the min filter so much. I didn't even know that it existed. And the idea of the min filter is to increase shapes. As you can see, I increase the filter strength, and then these shapes get bigger and bigger. But I saw something very nice on the YouTube channel of CG How, and he just painted different sizes of strokes on top of each other, smudged them a little softer brush on top, so pretty simple stuff, actually. And when you use the min filter on that, it generates very nice shapes. Look at this. This is super cool. I don't know how long it would take me to paint this by hand. So this is a very cool technique to make something nice. And here another example from Ben, who shows how to use the min filter with bigger values, and you get very nice, interesting stylized shapes out of that, right? Just some squiggly lines, and you get something very nice out of it. Okay, so that's about brushes, and now let's talk about the lightweight texture. These lightweights were generated in Photoshop, and it all starts with this little shape there, and then you can apply the wave filter in Photoshop to distort it a little bit. And then we use the good old radial blur with the zoom mode. And you will see here, every time, you use it every time, several times. And every time I do this, it gets better and better. And look at these shapes, how they develop. Doesn't this look awesome? And it just takes 2 minutes to do that. And just for a little comparison, here on the left is one of my very early textures where I tried the same in Photoshop by hand. And I can tell you, it took me longer than these 2 minutes using the Photoshop filter. And I guess we can agree that the right one looks a bit better. And we have a problem if we use Substance, because Substance does not offer a zoom blur node. So we as a VFX community lack this node, but fortunately, we have a Bruno in our community, and he told me how to make this happen in Substance. You can see it by using the polar to Cartesian node, and then a directional blur, and then Cartesian to polar again, and this is how it looks. So this is our zoom blur in Substance, just in case you want to have it. And we also have, fortunately, a Robin in our community, and he used the slope blur for that, and it looks like this. So very nice techniques in Substance, and this is my result. So I generated 2 more textures with these techniques. Lightning. If you look at the lightning, you will see this. What you will see when you look on different scales in the world, on different things, you will notice that the structures are often the same, or similar. Yeah? You see that the river, the blood vessel, and this little root at the right looks very similar to lightning. So maybe if you can't find the perfect resource or reference or texture, maybe you can get a little bit creative with your footage. And so I did. So I used the river, and I increased contrast and inverted it, and then cut away everything what did not look like a lightning. And then I also copied some parts from other parts of the river and rearranged them to look like my lightning. And this is how I did my lightning. But I wanted to have it fade in from top to bottom and fade out in a global erosion-y way, okay? But this was easy just in Photoshop. On top, I made a little gradient. I hope you can see there's a little gradient from top to bottom. And for the fade-out mask, I just used the Photoshop inner glow filter. And maybe it's not perfect, but it's good enough. And the water splash is maybe, now that we saw how to use these photos, not super special, but I just take this photo, increase the contrast, and then I cut out all the pieces I like and assemble them to a nice little water splash. And what I want to emphasize here is reusability of textures, of VFX textures, because you should, if possible, reuse them as much as you can. And here's an example. On my little explosion on the left, you see these sandy spikes, like the sand going off, right? And this is exactly the same texture like my water splash. So why should I create another sand splash texture if this is good enough, right? So lucky for me, it saved some time. Yeah. And also the moon in the background uses the blue channel of one of the textures from Lewis texture pack as a base for my little LUT, so that I could colorize it again. So I just reused whatever I could get in my hands. And the water is something I saw in a YouTube video. This is why, oh, on the next slide it will say source unknown, because I saw it in a very nice video, but I forgot what the video was. So if you see this talk, please people tell me that it was you and I will add you as a source. I generated these difference clouds in Substance, but you can also do it in Photoshop by applying the difference clouds filter twice on your canvas. And then I used Substance to generate the normal map. So not too special, but what I like about Substance is the preview, because it's very nice to emphasize how roughly it will look in your game, right? And I would also like to underline that these shapes on the left there, they look awfully a lot like lightning. And it is actually a technique to generate these clouds, increase the contrast, and then use these shapes for your lightning textures. But I did not, because I wanted to show you the creative approach using photos. And the source is unknown, like I said. And now let's talk about the waterfall. So the waterfall starts, of course, with a reference I really liked. And there's something, we will use Substance for that. And when I think about Substance, I always think about making things from scratch. I guess it comes from the fact that the Substance tutorials out there for stone and sand and all these cool things always start from scratch, and they generate photorealistic results, and this is just amazing. But I tried, and to be honest, I think this explosion texture, which I tried doing from scratch, could be improved a little bit, and also this fire is not without the potential to get better. But at some point I realized, why should I do everything from scratch? Why not take a flame from a photo like here, use a tile sampler node, and just splatter it on the canvas in Substance, and then get a perfectly nice, fiery, tileable texture out of this within some minutes. And this is what I did for the waterfall. So I took this amazing texture from textures.com and made the border a little bit softer, and then used this tile sampler node to just splatter it around. And this is the result. You can see here I scale it up and down to see how where the actual textures are, and I think it blends very, very well. And then I put it on my waterfall on the edge. And now I'm contradicting myself a little bit. I said we are talking about good enough, but I was not super satisfied, even though it should be good enough, right? But I wanted to try something else, because I found it did not resemble too much the structures in my reference folder, right? Folder, texture, picture. So then I did something crazy. I used the reference picture as texture. So I got into Substance with the SVG node, which lets you paint vector shapes. Yeah. So I painted some vector shapes, I blurred them a little bit, and with that I cut away all these pieces which I did not need. And then I did the same, like before. I just splattered around a lot and have now a texture which looks like this, which resembles more the structure I was looking for. But then, while looking at all these photos, I saw this, and I really like this layer structure in this waterfall, right? But I couldn't find a nice texture to resemble that. But what I found was, when you look at the forest, and you flip the forest, and you increase the contrast a little bit, it looks kind of like these layered structures, right? So I just took this in my Substance, and overlaid this layer with the other layer I created before. And now I got here where I have some nice structures, but also sometimes you see these wavy layer things falling down, right? So this is what I ended up with. And here are some more creative ways. This one is from Pete Clark, how to use interesting photo choices for your textures. So he generates a master flash out of a little rubber duck. And here is the good old chicken thingy, which gets converted into texture. Yeah. So unfortunately, these are not for me, but they are still awesome. Okay, and now let's talk about this little cloud. For this little cloud, I used a tool which is just there for creating clouds. It's called Kumo Works. It's open source. And you can paint a very simple shape, and it will create a very nice cloud. There are a lot of sliders, but you can use these templates to get different cloud structures out of that, which is super, super nice. And also, you can change the light source direction, which means that if your shader can do it, you can generate different light maps from all directions, and then you have a 6-sided light map shader in your game if you want to have this. And here is the texture I generated out of this. And for this cloud, I generated 3 different masks. The diffuse mask, of course. But then I wanted, when the lightning goes off, have a little mask from below that the little cloud is a little bit lit. And for that, I just used the light source comes from below now. I just used another version of my little cloud and increased the contrast. And then took my original texture, inverted it, and then increased the contrast a bit and masked it a bit out. And combined both. And this is my little mask for the lighting. No, the lightning for the lighting cloud. And was this correct? I don't know. Okay, but you get what I'm saying. And the last thing is I wanted to have this cloud appear, not just fade in and out. I wanted to appear, at least at the beginning, and that it grows, that it erodes into the scene. And this is, I just painted with soft standard brushes on top of the alpha channel, and this is basically just what I did there. And these 3 different masks I put now into one texture, into the RGB channels. And this is something we know as gray packing or channel packing. It's a very common known technique, but I wanted to add 2 things about that. First, I don't know if you know, but in Photoshop, in the layer style, in your folder, layer photos or the layers themselves, you can enable these checkboxes to send this photo or layer directly to the color channel, which is amazing and super easy. So you can do that here in my GIF. You see how I just check these boxes and everything is set up. Or you just use the plugin by Francesco. It is also capable of doing that, but yeah, wanted to share this knowledge here. And second, the big advantage of channel packing is that you have to sample your texture only once in the shader. Yeah? Here I sample it only once, and then I can use these 3 masks which are put into the RGB channels for whatever I want. But often my shaders sample each layer separately anyway, because, for example, I want to move them in different ways, or maybe I want to sample them in different resolutions or something with different UV tilings. And so for my workflow, 90% of the time, I noticed that this channel packing, I love this technique, but I prefer to store these masks as grayscale images, just as separate ones, and then I can reuse them very easily in other shaders, which also read in these masks. But it is a very cool technique for these special cases, like my little cloud. And there is actually a talk from Nicola about Spellbounds, which I heavily recommend. It's super cool. They use this technique for almost all their VFX textures, and they have one master shader reading in everything, and it's super interesting. So if you like the technique, then you can have a look on this talk. Shader magic. It doesn't fit in here so well because I would like to talk about textures, right? But I think there are 3 simple techniques which can boost your textures a lot. And it was important to me to share them, because even if you are a bit hesitant with going into material or shader creation, I think these can help you a lot. And so I wanted to share this. UV distortion, lookup textures, and erosion are 3 techniques which are simple but cool. And UV distortion, we saw that at the beginning already, it adds some motion, like my little cloud starts wobbling if you generate it with this example here. And here is the cloud again. You see that, my static texture, not super exciting, but up there with this simple shader trick, a lot of motion suddenly, which I really like. And lookup textures are, like we spoken before, just there to colorize your grayscale image or mask with a little lookup gradient. Very resourceful technique. And it also changes how you create your textures. Because instead, if you want to have different versions for your flipbook, you do not need to store them separately into different color versions. You can now use a grayscale flipbook and colorize it with this little lookup gradients, which is better for performance and memory, and also gives you as a VFX artist more flexibility. And it is also used, and this is for the stylized people, you can use it for stylization as well. So on the left is the explosion like seen before, and on the right, I used the little lookup texture, which only has some colors, and you can see that it looks way more comic-y, I would say. So it's a very useful tool to have into your belt. And Erosion is, like we spoken before, there for making the fade out a bit more interesting. And here you can see another little shade example. I just put them in for someone want to implement it later. And it basically fakes complexity, so that here you see on the left side, there's the little texture, and you see these shapes falling down, and while they're falling down, they dissolve, right? And on the right, you see how it would look like if you would just use soft alpha, and it's not just exciting. And here, the same example, on the left, we see these water splashes, and while they are falling down, they erode away, so it looks way more exciting, I think, than on the right side, where nothing happens, basically. Yeah. Yeah, and here you see alpha erosion and soft alpha. And this is also a technique which can be used for stylization. Again, left side is the explosion, this time with the stylized look-up texture assigned. And on the right side, you see how the alpha erodes away. And I think it looks way more like a stylized, I don't know, manga animation or explosion than the left side, right? So there are not too many resources to about this topic, about the texture generation itself, but there are quite some tools out there, like, for example, this little cloud tool I just showed. And did you know, for example, that Krita has a particle brush engine which allows you to paint very nice wispy smoke? Oh. Or that Photoshop has a flame filter which generates very nice flamey shapes for you. And we did not even talk about the Effect Texture Maker, which is a tool running in your browser, and it can generate many kind of different textures for you and save it into a flipbook. Super practical. And then there's a Flame Painter, is a very commonly known tool, but it is, I didn't know that there is an online version which you can also use for creating very interesting things, and you can see the links down there, of course. And I think it would be nice if we could collect all these knowledge at some point, maybe at a centralized website or something, so that everyone can access that, because it's really, it took a lot of research for me to find all these things. And I think it would be nice if this person can then maybe would prepare a talk about this, and while talking then mention that he actually did. So I created this resource database for my preparation where I collected all these things, and I separated in 8 different categories. The first 4 are like to find textures and texture patches and packs and brushes, and also some photo and video footage which you can use as a base for your textures. And the other 4 are focus on tutorials. So I collected any tutorial I could find. I mean, there are not too many, but what I could find, I put in there for the different methods of generating the textures. And if you feel fancy, you are, of course, free to search the database directly by yourself with keywords, by authors, or maybe some like fire or lightning or something like that. I need to mention I will extend the keywords further in the future. So if there's maybe something in there which you can't find yet, hopefully in the future it will be better. I didn't have too much time to perfectionize all the tagging yet, but I will do in the future. And now you may ask, yeah, that's great, but how do I access that? And to that I would answer, you can use this QR code or this URL, or this very small URL down there, if you like it a little bit shorter. And this will lead you to a website, just some notes on the website, just some links. And it will not only contain the link to the resource database, it also contains links to these slides. So if you want to revisit something, or you saw a source, that's why I mentioned before, you don't need to take photos, because you have it already right now. It is online right now, and you can just look at the slides. And I also added what I basically saying right now should be readable in these slides as a little speaker's commentary. So I hope this helps people who maybe didn't visit the talk yet. And it will also contain the Unreal project files and the substance files. And later, if this talk goes online, the video recording. And there is some stuff which did not make it into this talk because of time purposes. So when you scroll down, there's a little secret section called Content++, and you can look at these slides for even more little tricks. And I added a commentary in the speaker's notes just for these reasons. And you can help to make this whole situation better if you want, because I think there are, like I said, not too many resources, right? So if you, because in my perfect dream world, this talk is just the beginning of this whole discussion. And maybe it can inspire other people to generate some more resources now, specifically for this topic. I would very much like it to feel less overwhelmed in the future. And if you do, you can use this hashtag, because it was only used once on Twitter by CG How, actually. And I think we can just take it and share our knowledge there. If you have more resources which are not already in the database, then feel free to tell me and I can add the resource. And if you share something already, like maybe you're sharing a texture pack or something, then please share it as CC0 so that anyone can use it without attribution or charge money. This is totally fine. I'm happy to pay for good content, but it would be nice to avoid the attribution issue. And if you can paint, maybe you consider making a little tutorial about this, because sometimes I see concept artists, amazing pieces, like I don't know, a castle or a dragon or something, and then they paint over some effects. And I'm like, oh, I would like to know how you did paint these effects, right? So there's a little example. Kiernan usually he paints figures and stuff like that, but he has one video about video game particles, and I really enjoyed it that much. It was a really cool little lecture, and yeah, maybe other people fancy that too. And if you're a VFX artist, maybe you consider to not only share your VFX in your ArtStation profile, but maybe also the textures, because it's even though you don't see the process, it's still a very good learning opportunity to see what an effect was made of. And if you want, maybe you want to even show your process, maybe even a speed painting. A very nice example is Sarah Carmody, and she shares a lot of processes. This is just simple GIFs. She also has speed paintings on her ArtStation page, and it's not necessarily a VFX texture now, but I think it's still a good example how much you can take out of even this simple GIF. It's so cool to see, right? Yeah, so these are the things you can do if you want to improve the whole situation. And White Sheep Studio, this is the company I'm working at, is also hiring. So if you feel like you would like to work in the south of France, in a very nice team, and like you can see, a very nice little office, then feel free to check out this little URL. And I would also like to take the time to thank some people, because Celine is our CEO at White Sheep. And without her, it wouldn't have been possible for me to fly here and to stay here. So thank you so much for that. And Leah organized the whole trip, and she took away a lot of stress from me, I can tell you. And of course, Veer was also my contact person to GDC, and without him, I wouldn't even have dared to apply for this talk here. So thank you so much. And the other people there, I highly recommend checking their profiles out. They are all great artists, and these are the people who gave me so much feedback for this talk and shaped it together with me. So if you liked it, feel free to visit their profiles and give them some love. If you did not like it, then that's on me. And if there are more questions, then of course you can send me a Twitter or an email. Of course we can also talk after this, because I love to speak to fellow VFX guys. And so that's this for that. Yeah, I didn't forget anything. Yeah, and this is the end. So my name is Simon. And please don't forget, using photos is not cheating. Thank you. And please fill out the vote forms, I shall say. These little things to, you know it, right? The vote, the feedback forms, okay? Great. So that's it for me. Yeah, we have 10 minutes left, which is very pleasant. In my tests, sometimes I run a bit over the time, but I guess I was a bit nervous and spoke faster. So if you want you can ask something. But like I said, we can also talk afterwards if you want. Oh, a question. Hello. Oh no, 2 questions. Oh, that's great.
You have a fantastic hierarchy for organizing like which route you take. Have you ever had to sell that workflow to a company that had more set in stone pipelines of their own?
No. Good question. Like this pipeline, if it would be implemented in a company, and you mean that maybe I hit against the wall maybe by implementing it? Yeah.
Against like what they were used to.
Yeah. My problem is that I was always the sole VFX artist in these companies. So I never worked in a huge company. So positively formulated, I never hit a wall. So that's good. But this also means that I never have a real fixed guideline to follow. I just was doing it on the go and hoped it will result in something positive.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Hey, before the question, by the way, if everyone doesn't know, there's a VFX meetup at the St. Regis Lobby Bar Thursday night at 6:30, so come hang out.
Cool.
Optical flow, motion vectors, and Slate. I've done a lot of that. It's an awesome tool, but the numbers never seem to translate into Unreal correctly. I don't know, the motion vector intensity number that it gives you seems to be just completely wrong. Yes. And I usually just and I just kind of eyeball it. I don't know, have you found a better way than that to take that and get it looking correct?
This is a question coming from one who knows the pain. I did actually 2 tutorials about this, and I basically eyeball it as well, because they give you some numbers which are supposed to be correct, but they are not really, right? Yeah. And I have this YouTube channel, it's called Unreal Simon, and there I made 2 videos just about Slate and how to get these things out of that. But there are some other numbers which supposedly have nothing to do with that, but for me they worked. So I just took them, and and then of course if I was not satisfied, I also eyeballed it. But yeah, the usability could be improved a little bit in that regard. Yeah.
Okay, and that's not the motion vector intensity. That's some other numbers that are. Is that in the tutorial that you mentioned? Where to find those numbers? I think the numbers change. The numbers change depending on how your simulation looks like. I think it is like that. Yeah. And I mean, is the YouTube here? Maybe can you look at this together? YouTube. Let me see. YouTube. Unreal Simon. Problem is there's also a Simon Unreal out there. No, this was with Houdini. Why don't find my video? Because then we can have a look at this together. But in general, it's a tutorial in general about the whole Slate workflow, but it covers sorry, I can't find it right now. I don't know why the Google search doesn't show it to me. But this part is a small part of it. So I think you will hopefully be happy when you see it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. If there is no more questions, then I can just show you, just for a short moment, the Content++ section, which looks like this, Content++, and then here there is some more things. For example, a summary of all the knowledge nuggets I wanted to drop on you, just a little summary, and then there is some more little examples down there, and like you see, there's comments down there, so this hopefully makes you happy. And by the way, just because I forgot it during the talk, this texture is so wide because it was put on this long rim of water. So I wanted to avoid tiling issues. You know, if I would have used a square texture, you would have seen the tiling too much. So here, that's why it was so wide. Okay. So if there's no more questions, then we can. I don't know, have water now. So thank you for being here. It was really, really nice to give me your time and listen to me. Thank you so much.